All right, welcome back in. This is the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and I've had some amazing guests, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. But today I'm really excited because I have a guy that I recruited, coached, was a great, great player at the University of Alabama, played in the NBA, but right now has a blossoming career on ESPN. I'm so proud to have Richard Hendrix from Athens, Alabama. Richard, how are you?
Doing great, Coach. Thank you for having me.
You know, just to kind of give everybody that is watching a little bit of a background, Richard is from Athens, Alabama, the northern part of the state. And when I was the head coach at Alabama, we wanted to recruit the best players in the state. We kind of wanted to control and own the state as far as the best players. And Richard was a McDonald All-American, Parade All-American, probably rated one of the top 10 or so players in the country coming out of high school. And, it came down to us in North Carolina, but Richard decided to stay home and play for us at Alabama. And I still remember how excited, Richard, I was that you were going to join us at Alabama. And to this day, man, thankful for you, your family, your mom and dad. But I just loved coaching you. So how about those days? Think about back to when you were getting recruited and came down. Tell us a little bit about that with us in Carolina and all the other schools that were recruiting you as well.
Well, first off, I have to thank you for, obviously recruiting me and bringing me to the University of Alabama. It was a very important time in my life, and I enjoyed my 3 years being there on the campus and playing and learning the game. But, that's probably the number one question that people ask me. When they start to find out a little bit about my basketball background, they say, man, why did you pick Alabama over North Carolina and all these other blue bloods that you were getting recruited by? And, I tell people all the time, if you can go back to the early 2000s, it really makes perfect sense. And it's a credit to you and what your staff was able to do, because when I was getting recruited as a freshman, 2001, 2002, when you guys first noticed me at Athens High School, North Carolina at the time was not the North Carolina that they were and what they ended up being. And Alabama, you go back to 2001, your team wins 25 plus games, if I'm not mistaken, goes to the NIT championship game. You recruit all of these players from the state of Alabama, and I'm a coach's son. So I grew up going to the state basketball tournament in Birmingham every single year. So I've always seen all of these players from high school basketball compete in the Final Four and for state championships. And here you are coming in, a young coach, recently won a national championship as an assistant at UCLA, has won several conference titles at Murray State. And you're coming to Alabama, and the team is full of Alabama guys. And your first years, you're going to the NIT championship game. You win the SEC in 2002. In 2003, which is like my sophomore year, Alabama, people do not remember, was the #1 team in America. 2004, Alabama goes to the highest finish they've ever had, which is an Elite Eight. So if you look back at that time period, and everybody says, how do you do that? Why would you do that? The biggest thing that you sold to me was after Antoine Petway hit that shot in 2004 to move on out of the first round. It was a buzzer beater to get out of the first round. They end up going to the Elite Eight. And he stands up near the podium and goes to the camera. He points his jersey and holds up Alabama, right, just like this. And that resonated with me because that's where I'm from. I'm a kid that's from the state. And I wanted to be a part of that. And we had a great recruiting class with myself and Alonzo G and Brandon Hollinger, who was a 6A player of the year. Yamin Coleman was a 5A state champion. Greg Cage was going to be on the team, who was a really good player in his state in Indiana. And I was following a recruiting class with a 2-time Mr. Basketball with Ronald Steele. And it was a collection of guys who were all from the state. And I thought that I was going to be the next piece that could help push us over the hump to get to the Final Four and maybe win a national championship. And as a 16, 17-year-old, to me, I felt like that would mean far more than if you did it at any of these other schools that had that type of history and tradition of winning. You know, unfortunately, you know, things didn't always work out the way we wanted. You had some untimely injuries, some things that took place on the team that, you know, things happen. But the table was set for us to go ahead and make that next step as a program. And you know, the reality is that people don't realize, particularly Alabama fans, is that Alabama basketball has always been a really strong program with really good coaches, really good players. But that one elusive Final Four has been the one thing that has really prevented the program from being accepted as one of the elites nationally. And I always thought that it could be my dream that I could help push us over the top. And sometimes things don't happen, but my experience that I had there in 3 years was great, and I wouldn't change my decision.
You know, Richard, and thank you for that. I look back, too, and when I went to the University of Alabama as the head coach, you know, my philosophy was that we wanted to get the best players in the state. And every now and then, you know, reach into Mississippi like we did with Mo Williams or with Alonzo G down in Florida and Jamario Davidson out of Atlanta. But, you know, 90% of what we were going to do is we felt like if we got the best players every year, we could build Alabama's program into being one of the best in the country. And that was like, you know, getting yourself to come. And that was our philosophy, because I always believed, Richard, just like you have done in your career and your life, that I never thought you would end up living in North Carolina as an adult. Maybe you would have, but, you know, most likely you were probably going to end up back as an adult in Alabama. And if you can tie your name to the University of Alabama, you know, what it does for the rest of your life. And, you know, even as an adult, and then as you have a family and children, because you're probably going to live there. Did some of that go through your mind as well as you looked long-term about the university and what the university and connecting you with the university could do for you?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it was also, to be honest, it was a family thing. You know, I grew up an Alabama fan. My two older sisters had already graduated from the university. I had an older cousin who graduated from Alabama. My aunt graduated from Alabama and one of the first black graduates that the university ever had, you know, generations before. So it was a legacy within the family of us going to the university. And, you know, it was a good timing for me to be a part of it. But, you know, Alabama is a place where a lot of people don't leave home. You kind of are close-knit to your family. You grow up there, you live there, and you have a lot of connections and pride with the state. So it most definitely played a large role in what I saw in my future. And it's been able to pay off to this day. I mean, I played 13 years professionally, and as soon as I finished and retired, I got a phone call from some people at the University of Alabama and asked if I wanted to call some games on their SEC Network Plus platform. And I don't know if that connection would have been there if I had not been a kid who was from the state, who obviously went to the school and had some great connections while I was there. So it definitely paid off in the future.
You know, Richard, when I look back and, you know, I remember watching you as a young player in high school, and, you know, I felt like I could drive to Athens, Alabama with my eyes closed. You know, I went up there so many times. But at what point for you, at what age were you, or at what point in your career, you know, because obviously you become a McDonald All-American, which is the best players in the country, you know, top 20 players in that game, the McDonald All-American game. You're a parade All-American, obviously the best player in the state of Alabama. But at what point, looking back, did you start to say in your mind, like, you know what, I can be pretty good at this game. Like I'm not just kind of, you know, I got a chance to, you know, play at a high level and potentially play in the pros. You know, was there a point in your, you know, youth development that you really started to, it clicked for you that you had a chance to be that good of a player?
Well, I always was driven, and I was always a talented kid. You know, I have to admit, when you have some size, that plays a large advantage in being a pretty good athlete. But at the same time, you have to have coordination and hand-eye coordination to go along with that size. And I was blessed with that at a young age. But when I got to be a freshman in high school and I was playing varsity, midway through that season, I started to tell that I was starting to hit my stride and was probably the best player in the area at 15 years old. And I got an invitation to come play out with the AAU team with the Alabama Lasers. And Wig Pearson was the head coach at the time. And after we played in the Boo Williams tournament, and it was just good fortune. We had a starting big who was on the team who wasn't going to make the trip because he had to stay back and take the ACT. And that put me into the starting lineup as a 15-year-old playing at one of the top AAU tournaments in the country. And we win the tournament, and I'm the starter. And it gets me an invitation to the Nike All-American Junior Camp in St. Louis. I go there. I'm one of the top 10 players in the camp, and I get invited to the big Nike camp in Indianapolis, where they have every year, where it's like 175 of the top high school players in the country come and play in front of all the college coaches. And it was after that camp when I was able to hold my own against all of these players that you read about in the magazine and watch their highlights online about. After that camp, when I came home, I knew that I had, a little bit more ability and I could take this a long ways. And that really helped my confidence out.
Richard, not only, were you a great player and I loved coaching you, but, you always have been, even when we were recruiting you in high school and then in college, you're not only a great player, but you had, you're just a great person. You're like your character level. Like you were a guy that, coaches love to coach you. You were going to do everything that was asked of you. You were going to give your best every day. There was never a time where you felt like, Richard's, not put forth an effort. And I know your mom and dad, they're wonderful people. Your dad was your high school coach, but that kind of character that you still have to this day, it's why you have a successful career now in broadcasting. But talk a little bit about that and kind of how that kind of cultivated with you as a young guy growing up, because you were a great player, but not only on top of being a great player, you were just such a great person still to this day. Talk about that a little bit as a young guy growing up.
Well, that all the credit has to go to my parents and the upbringing. When you grow up in a small town, everything in the community is connected. It's all surrounded around the schools and growing up in the church and whatnot. So you have a good foundation of family values and traditional values of just doing things the right way. And that was instilled within our household. Both of my parents were school teachers. So I learned at an early age that you had a level of accountability with your mom or dad right down the hall, that you had to, carry yourself a little bit differently than everyone else. And it was just a mentality that I was able to carry with me everywhere that I went. It's funny. My dad would always tell us before we went to school, I was in the 9th grade. He was a high school teacher and a coach. And we get ready to go to high school. And the first day I'm riding in the car with us. And before he cranks up the car, he looks over at me and he says, whatever you do, don't you embarrass me. And listen, that's just the attitude that it was in the household. Like, it's like, hey, wherever you go, you have to understand that you don't just represent yourself. You represent all of us. And that was just something that was driven within the household. And we all lived by it. And, it was a good value and a good lesson that we had. And it seemed to pay off for me everywhere that I've gone.
As you got to Alabama, Richard, go back into that era that you played there, and we had some good players at that point in time too, and you were joining in with some pretty good guys. Talk about just like, you first get to campus, you're excited, and you guys are playing pickup games, and, and you're trying to feel it out. You're feeling out, okay, how am I going to fit into this, and talk a little bit about that. If you can look all the way back to those first, times when you were on campus and jumping into the program.
Well, I came in to campus and, I was very excited. I was actually coming off of you might not remember, I was coming off a little minor knee injury that I had, the little cleanup situation I had. So I was a little bit behind the schedule that I wanted to be after a long season of playing high school. But, we had a talented team and I was looking forward to coming in. And one thing about me, I like to compete. I was not afraid of coming to a team that I knew had Chuck Davis, who was a starting big, who just took a team to a Elite Eight, was going to be a preseason All-SEC pick. Jamario Davidson, who had entered the NBA draft, so was clearly a draft product and prospect. And Ronald Steele, who was an All-SEC guard. I wasn't concerned about coming in and competing. But my mentality to come in was that I really wanted to go to college because I don't know if you remember, there was a little bit of mumblings about me possibly entering my name in the NBA draft because it was the last year that anyone was to enter their name in the draft because they were selecting high school guys. And in that 2005 high school class, I believe we had 9 or 10 guys to get drafted because everybody was just entering. But I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a student and get my education. And my mentality was that I wanted to go to school and be part of a good team. Now, I competed. I loved the pickup games. I felt like I came in and I was playing really good basketball early on. The biggest challenge that I had, and, sometimes I think, it might have been because of you, Coach, is that, you're playing against Chuck Davis every single day. You get matched up in practice against a seasoned veteran. And that's the wake-up call you get right there. You come in there with all of the accolades. You're the McDonald's All-American. You're Mr. Basketball. And you're thinking to yourself, just like every high school kid, I'm about to come in and I'm going to be the man. But, I found out early on in practice that, there was a learning curve. And I had to play against a really good player in a program, in a system who knew what he was doing and knew what I had to do. And it was a little bit of a challenge, but I was able to overcome it. I think in game 3, I ended up having a breakout game of 22 points and 14 rebounds. So, the learning curve was short, but I wasn't afraid of the competition that was on that roster, and it made me better to compete every single day against quality players.
Do you think, Richard, because I look back, like even at Chuck Davis and the Alabama, the faithful, they'll remember Chuck. Maybe nationally people don't as well, but Chuck was such a good player, and Chuck's footwork was so good. One thing I always loved about him, and our assistant coach, Tom Asbury, I thought did a great job of helping Chuck too, but was there time periods with you even where, because Chuck did develop that, he got to where, we used to joke around like Kevin McHale type, footwork, the pump fakes and up and unders. And he was so crafty with that. Was there somebody like Chuck or somebody else that you started saying, okay, there are things I can learn as well as I'm developing? I want to learn those as well. Like when you looked at other players, was there anybody like that for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because as you know, when you're running the UCLA high post offense, which is very effective when you run it the right way, there's some spots that you have to become accustomed to getting your points in. And Chuck learned how to do that. I also think that he learned how to do that from Erwin Dudley. And Erwin Dudley probably learned it from the first big that you coached at Alabama. So if you're a smart young player and you're not stubborn and you want to produce and get playing time, you're going to learn from the guys who are in front of you that are getting it done in a certain way. So, just the ability of understanding how to shoot jump hooks and using angles and being patient when the double team comes, if you can command a double team, knocking down a consistent 15-foot jump shot, all of those little things, getting your position early. And also, I would also say this that you learned from the previous guys is defensively. So many of those values that you learn by playing, meeting your man early, not letting them get deep position, 3/4 in the round, all of that stuff was something that translated throughout the rest of my professional career. And it was all because of, the experience of playing against veteran players early on, having a little bit of learning curve and trying to get better and better every single day with the skill development.
Outside of basketball too, Richard, because you were such a good player, but you were a great student too, and you took schoolwork serious, which, a lot of players, some do, some don't. That's just part of the turf. But, even for me, I have a degree from the University of Alabama. I'm proud of it. I loved it. I loved going to school there. And for you, the experience of, being an in-state guy who's also walking across campus every day. You're obviously well known. People know who you are. Students, your classmates know who you are. But talk about that experience just as a student, because that time, a lot of times that's lost in the equation. A lot of people don't talk about that as much. It's just basketball. But you also embraced, being a student too, which some guys didn't, but you really did. And for you, that I would hope that meant a lot to you as well.
Oh, I loved it. I loved being a student at the University of Alabama. And that's one thing that I see with a lot of these kids nowadays who are in colleges. I don't think they truly take advantage of the college experience the way that it was intended. So many kids now are taking online classes. They do so many things in the basketball or football facility. They eat their meals in the facility. I had a bike on campus. I rode to my classes. I met my wife at the University of Alabama. We ate lunch at the Ferguson Center every single day, in our last years there. So many friends that I had in connections that had nothing to do with basketball just because, I took pride in being a student. the campus life was great. And I enjoyed every bit of it. Going into communications college and taking the degree seriously, concentration that I had seriously was something that I really enjoyed. And if I'm not mistaken, I might have been and may till this day be the only player that graduated in 3 years even, for
That's
basketball.
Right.
I mean, so it showed the commitment that I had. I showed up in 2005 and I never left. I took every interim summer school period that they had. I got as many credits as I possibly could, and I handled my business. But more so than that, I enjoyed it, and it was fun. And those connections and those memories I had in the classroom, I cherish those just as much as I do the memories I have on the basketball court.
Richard, and I'm glad you said that because, and I've just now remembered that you graduated in 3 years on time, and you did take every summer session, every interim, everything you could, you did, and you did a great job with that. Talk to me about this one too, Richard, because when I coached there, and I was there 11 years, I loved it, loved Alabama. It was home for me. And but I got grumpy a little bit at the end because we had success in basketball. We had been to the Elite Eight. We'd been ranked number 1 in the country. And obviously football at Alabama is, it is and always will be because of the history they've had, obviously with Bear Bryant and Gene Stallings, Nick Saban, the whole thing. But I always felt I let it bother me too much that we weren't getting the, attention that I thought we should as a basketball program because we had accomplished, some things that had never been done there before. And we had great players before us and great coaches. But how is a player for you? You're a basketball player. You're one of the best players in the country. But football is just kind of there. It's this big shadow. And for me, I let it bother me. I shouldn't have. I got grumpy. But how was that for you as a player? Because we were pretty good in basketball. But football is football.
Oh, listen, it still bothers me to a degree now. I mean, Coach, we're basketball people. And when you're a basketball person, you're giving it your all. Like, I eat, breathe, and I sleep this stuff. Like, I watch film late into the night. I coach my kids' youth team. It's what I've done. It's not the only thing that I am, but I know for many people, it becomes a part of the identity of how they know you. And, even now, as I'm a broadcaster on ESPN and SEC Network, you listen on every morning radio show and the conversation is more so talking about recruiting classes for football and spring practice and who are the new coordinators. And it's just like, hey, they're in the middle of basketball season. Like, when is there the time we're not going to talk about this stuff and talk about what's going on the hardwood? And listen, I love football just as much as anybody. I played as a kid, felt like I could have been a force even if I would have elected to play that in college. But it's just like the game is beautiful. The game is on a high level. The X's and O's that the coaches are using on the court, it's really something to marvel at. And for me, as a person who's huge about Alabama basketball in the state for high school and in the college, you only want the fan base to have this same level of interest in basketball as they do in football. And I'm understanding it will never be to that degree. But if you could ever see the game through the lens of people who are involved in basketball, then you'll see how great it is. I mean, football is in a culture where, the schedule comes out, you find where the teams are playing, you plan your whole life around that football schedule, you travel to the games. But basketball is something you just turn the game on 3 minutes before it tips off, and that's the only information you have. The post game, you only talk about it for a minute if you do follow it up, whereas every single person has far more interest in football. And that's not to knock football, but for me, as you spoke on at the time that we were there, we got up to be a number 4 in the country at one point. We were 13-1 going into SEC play. And it's a similar correlation to Alabama right now. I say it all the time. I don't know if people realize what's actually going on as far as what they're accomplishing.
Right.
And the coaching staff, the players, everyone that's involved is so committed and working so hard that you can only hope that people have that same level of interest and support behind it. Because as you mentioned at the end of your time there, as a coach or a player that's giving your all, that extra attitude and boost from the fan base and everyone else is significant and helps get you over the hump. You know, when you play against teams that have that type of support, you can feel it. It's a difference. And you want to have that behind you at all times. And I would also add, when I played professionally, I played for some really good teams. And high expectations are good. It helps the players to understand that they're playing for more than themselves and they're playing for everyone else. And when you're playing for more than yourself, you tend to dial in a little bit more, focus and understand the importance of every single game and moment and take your job a little bit more seriously. When you don't feel that support and backing, you tend to lose that concentration just as much as the fan base and everybody else does. And you just take a loss and move on. It doesn't bother you. So it's important for everyone to get behind it because it's a beautiful game and everyone is giving it all they have, just how they are in any other sport. But at the same time, this is a sport that everybody enjoys and everybody plays. I mean, so at the same, you want that level of backing for sure.
You know, Richard, I used to tell people this, and I want your take on this one, thought I have, because, you know, even like in our era there when we had to, you know, for 11 years had some great teams, great runs, and you were a part of a lot of all that. And but because football is so big, and I get it, and I'm a football fan, I like going to the games and cheering, and I loved it, you know, even as a player at Alabama. But if we would have had the same success we had with the players like you, who were as highly acclaimed as you were, and I'm not knocking Alabama at all. I love Alabama, and I think what Nate Oates is doing right now is off the charts. I'm a biggest fan of anybody. But if you took that and replicated our success at Indiana or at North Carolina or at Michigan State, where it's more of a basketball fan base, you would be celebrated even more. It's almost like sometimes the greatness that's been going on in Alabama basketball, even though some of the teams we had, some of the players like yourself, and you mentioned Ron Steele and Alonzo G and Gerald Wallace and Irwin Dudley and some of those guys that were so good players, and Mo Williams, we didn't necessarily get the national maybe recognition that maybe you would have had if you, and I'm not trying to knock Alabama. I love Alabama, but would you agree with that a little bit? If you just took the exact same records, exact same players, exact same accomplishments, but you were at North Carolina or Duke or Indiana, it's a different ball game as far as how people perceive the program. What's your take on that thought that I have?
Oh, yeah. I think you're spot on. And it's like you said, it's absolutely no knock to anyone. It's just what you recognize when you're a part of it. And for me, in high school, I was probably a top 5 player in my class. I decided to commit to the University of Alabama after all of the other schools that I'm considering. And I noticed significantly after I committed and signed that the media attention when we would go to things as a group in all-star games didn't go to the guys who were going to the state schools as opposed to the blue bloods. And I saw that as the first change, that it was like, man, how did I just get worse when I'm the same player just because of what happened? You know, before I was committed, everybody was all over it. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, yeah, you didn't go to this school, you didn't go to that school. So yeah, he's not as good anymore. And that was that was frustrating. You also see it for the NBA draft. I always felt that I agree. If schools had those traditional powers, the blue blood schools, were doing what we had done in Alabama and even what yourself had done as a head coach. Mo Williams not a second-round pick. I'm not a second-round NBA draft pick.
No.
Gerald Wallace isn't a late first-round pick. Irwin Dudley's not undrafted. Chuck Davis, Kennedy Winston's not undrafted. You know, Alonzo G's not undrafted. Jermichael Green, who played a long time in the NBA, is not undrafted. These guys are first-round bona fide NBA draft picks. And we all know it because when we get to the professional ranks and you line it up out there, we can hold our own and be better than everyone in the gym. So, you know, we all see it. But that just comes with the territory. The only thing that you just have to question is like, what is the reason why and how can you change that? Now, I do think that times have changed in college basketball. I don't think that those traditional favorites carry the same power as they once did. I think this generation of kids don't have that same loyalty for traditions. I don't think that they want to play in those places as much. And with NIL, it's made it merely transactional to where they want to go play, which I do think that is a bad thing to a degree, because, you know, you do have to have that type of pageantry and traditions in the game, the history. I think that's a beautiful thing. But for programs that are right there on the cusp of trying to make it to that next level, it seemed elusive to get that level of respect, even though you were doing the work. Right. So it's a challenge, but it creates a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. And you know, in some ways it does motivate you, but, you know, many times you want to get your credit and the flowers that you deserve. I mean, as you mentioned, not too many guys go through college basketball and average a double-double. And if you do that at certain schools, it's going to be thought of a lot more. But the competition of the SEC and the reputation of the SEC at that time, in my opinion, was just as strong as it is now. And everybody says it's the strongest league. My freshman year, we had 8 teams, I believe, made the NCAA tournament. 7 teams won on the first day. The national champion was Florida, who was from the SEC. LSU goes to the Final Four. But, you know, for some reason, the reputation at that time and the perception was not what it is today, and it wasn't what it was compared to other leagues.
And, you know, we know it. We know how good it was, and you know how good it was, and I know how good you were, and, you know, we go through all that. But sometimes just nationally, you know, like when I coached at UCLA, you take a player at UCLA who was a really good player, but somehow nationally they were thought of as being better than maybe somebody like an Irwin Dudley, who was the SEC Player of the Year, or whomever, you know, like yourself. And so you're always trying to fight for that. And even, you know, when I was coaching at Alabama, you're fighting, you know, to get everybody's attention around the state as in regard to basketball, because it was so much discussion about football. I get it, and I'm a football fan, and football's, you know, what they've done, and obviously what Nick Saban did, he took it to a whole nother level. But I'm glad to see now. I'm glad because I think that, you know, obviously Nate Oates had the breakthrough last year, and they got into the Final Four, and he's just done a spectacular job. But I'm hoping at some point the fan base and the people and even the national media recognize how good some of the players like yourself and others, because it's almost like, well, they're at a football school, so, you know, they're good, but, you know, you kind of get some of that. And I felt that. I used to get grumpy about it all the time. I didn't like it. So, but it's just part of the turf, maybe, I guess.
It's part of it. I mean, you have to embrace it a little bit. You have to ignore it. I do think that the coaches who can handle that the best, as you mentioned, like if you could have let it go, because you don't have to spend the energy worried about that, and you can worry on other things. But it's so hard because you're giving it every ounce of you. And, you know, it's just like any other situation. You want the recognition for the work that you're putting in, particularly in a sport where it's getting played out on the court. We see the results. So if it takes place and you win the game or someone's better, you just want to acknowledge it. You don't want it to be glossed over to say, oh, well, he got lucky this time. Well, how does the luck keep happening over and over and over again? Like, at some point, you have to give this organization credit for what they've been able to do for a good period of time.
You know, Richard, you had a great career, and you were such a good player, and so many accolades. But, you know, as your playing career kind of winded down, in my view, and I've watched you on television do such a great job, but you've transitioned and you've kind of found your footing a little bit in broadcasting. And talk a little bit about that for you, because, you know, I did ESPN for 2 years. I loved it. I still wanted to coach, though. Like, for me, I still had the bug in me. You know, I'm sitting on one side of the court looking across like I should be over there, not over here, you know, and I was still that I had that desire to coach. But I look at you right now, Richard, I'm so proud of you. And not only, you know, because I coached you, but I think you're really good. And so talk about the transition a little bit for you in getting into broadcasting.
Well, you know, as I mentioned, I got my degree in the communications college at Alabama. So I've always been comfortable around the camera and with media. Being a son of educators, I don't have a problem with speaking and trying to articulate what I see and hoping to teach the game. Playing for a long time professionally allowed me to see the game from so many different perspectives. As you mentioned, at Alabama, I was a guy who came in off the bench. I was the starter in the focal point. I've been on NBA rosters of the guy who doesn't get in the game at all. I've been on EuroLeague championship teams and won MVPs, and I've been the starter. I've been a role player. And, I've been in every single position that you can have as an athlete and a basketball player. And I hope when I call the game, I love to bring that same type of perspective to the viewer, to present them with options that the player or the coach should make as far as adjustments within the game, things that they should do to take advantage of it, the emotions that you feel to take into that point in the game of what's about to happen. All of those things I try to bring into my broadcasting career, and it's been a lot of fun doing it. And I only hope that the viewer can take on the game from the perspective in which I see it from a former player who's been in a lot of those situations, and as a person that wants to support the game.
Richard, I think for you, and if you decide to stay with it, which I hope you do because you're really good, but, you think about, and when I was at ESPN, I can remember, and my uncle Mike Gottfried, who had coached football, he had been at ESPN. I remember him telling me, you got to remember there's somebody sitting on their couch watching the game who's not as educated about the game as we are. They're not going to know the intricacies of, a backdoor cut or a duck in on the high post, and they don't know that, and nor should they know all that. Right. And so you almost want to speak to the I always wanted on television to speak to that person sitting on the couch that's enjoying the game, but give them something that they can understand. So, and when I watch you, Richard, you do that very well. You express your thoughts in a way which I think is important for television, to where, the high-level basketball guy, the coach is watching the game, he gets it. But then there's another person watching the game that they don't really know much about basketball, but they're watching and they're enjoying the game. And sometimes broadcasters, they speak right over top of them. They can't. But for you, you just do a good job with that, of articulating it in such a way. And so have you, for you in that perspective, is that something for you does that resonate with you as far as just the everyday Joe fan out there who's watching the game?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're a coach's son and, and you have your mom who's a coach's wife, you sit around your entire life being around basketball, around one person that knows what's going on and the other is who's kind of just watching. So you learn the best of both worlds of how to deliver it. When my mom's watching games, she's watching something totally different. There's different things that perk her interest. My dad is trying to look at the defense and see if the team is passing the ball around several times before they take what he thinks is a quality shot. So, you have to give a little bit of both to the coach who's watching the game. Are you dissecting the X's and O's? To the mother who's, kind of listening to the game in the background, are you giving her something that makes her turn around for a moment and watch the game for 2 minutes in between what she's doing? And for the young player who's aspiring to be a high-level basketball player, did you give him a tip of how he can be better? How does he see something in a player on the court that player did, that I pointed out, that he can utilize in his game because I've been able to bring it to him in a way that relates to him positionally? If he's a small guard, if he's a big man with length, if he's a big man that can't jump and he uses his body well, if he's a shooter that can't dribble and comes off screens, who's in constant motion. There's so many moving parts in the game that you want to make sure you point out. The points in the game that are the tipping points. Can you tell the people, okay, this is the moment that you really need to watch? Because most people think that the moment in the game to win the game is the last 30 seconds in the game. No, the moment to win the game might be with 3 minutes to go in the first half, where the other team is on a run. Are you going to make a stop right here and get 2 or 3 stops to keep this game in balance? Or is it going to balloon to a double-digit lead? And that's where you'll never overcome. You know, it's a sense of urgency that you can only get as a player and a coach to know that these are the moments that you really have to focus on. Can you point out to the fans who are watching, this is a timeout that was called? The coach, as you know, Coach, you only have a handful of opportunities throughout the course of the game to really make a decision that can change the course of it. You've done your prep work. You've scouted, you've done what you've been doing in practice, and your identity of your team is who you are. But when you get that timeout, when you get to pull the clipboard out and draw up this one quick hitter that's going to get somebody some juice to get a clean basket, this can be a momentum changing call. And point that out to the viewer that this is where the coach really dictated this. He dialed that up. That wasn't the player. This was the coach that dialed that one up. Or this was the coach that decided that after this shot was made, they're jumping in the press, which is uncharacteristic, but they got to change tempo here. And you need to identify those things as a viewer of the game. You know, and this goes back to what you're talking about with football, particularly in the region in which I live, in the South. The casual viewer understands football far better than the casual basketball person. They understand that, hey, listen, we have to run the ball and establish a run game, or we're not going to be able to throw it. Or on defense, we got to get some pressure on the quarterback and disrupt him because he's dinking and dunking and completing these passes too well. Or we got to get off the field right now because the momentum is not in our favor. Most people watch basketball and think it's a good play if the ball went in. It's a bad play if the ball didn't. They don't know if it was good defense, if it was pressure defense on the ball, and he couldn't pinpoint that pass because the defender was in his face with active hands. They don't know if that guy picked up a foul in transition because he was out of position, or maybe it was because the big was lazy, hustling back in transition, and he pointed ahead to somebody else and said, switch. Now they're cross-matched, and now that kid picks up a foul. They don't know that that was just poor execution by the player and not the coach. I mean, they blame the coach and say, man, the coach has to prepare his team. Although as a player and the guys who coach, they understand we went over that action 20 times. And then when the lights come on, this one kid blows it and everybody's got the camera on the coach saying he has to do a much better job, but we can't say it in the college game. There's a way that can be articulated that kid needs to know that there's a level of accountability without it being personal. And the fan base needs to be able to see it through the lens of someone who really knows what's going on. Because oftentimes, you know, as coaches, media, fans who watch the game will have an assessment of what took place that is totally not accurate with what's going on at all.
At all.
And the coach, out of respect to everybody, has to go to the post-game press conference and take it on the chin when he knows, man, listen, we were in practice and went over this all day long, and this guy wasn't paying any attention, and we begged him, we pleaded with him, we tried our best, and when the lights went on, what happened that we said we doesn't need to allow happened exactly how I thought it would, and we lost the game by a point. And, you know, everybody thinks it's something else. That's important to articulate. And that's where I talk about that I want the basketball community and the people who watch the game to really learn what's going on in the game, because it's a chess match. Yeah. It's a chess match every trip up and down the court if you're playing the game the right way. You're looking for the matchups. You're looking for the advantages. And it's not just a pickup game where everybody's running up and down just hoping to make a shot. And if people viewed the game in that such, I think they would really, really enjoy college basketball and high-level basketball.
And that's why I think you're really good at this, because you do a good job of that. You know, when I was at NC State as the head coach, we shared our arena with an NHL team and the Carolina Hurricane, and I got to know the couple of the head coaches that were the NHL head coaches. They're hockey coaches. And they're telling me, said, oh, we run plays like you guys run, and you guys kind of do a pick and roll, and we kind of do this. And so then I'm watching a hockey game, and I'm trying to see it, and I still can't see it, you know. And I think there's a lot of fans in basketball, you know, they look at, you know, guys running up and down the floor, whereas in football, you know, you run a play, you stop, you huddle up, you run a play, we know it's a pass play and an out pattern or whatever. But basketball, it's a constant flow, and so there's there's a need, and this is where I think you do such a good job when I watch you, Richard, there's a need to explain a little bit, because it's hard for the casual fan. They're watching a missed shot, and there comes a fast break, and if the floor isn't balanced on a fast break, or the way that Nate Oates' teams like to play, where they're hunting for the three even in the break. Everybody has a different philosophy on how they want to play, but you do a really good job with that of, kind of bringing that into a place to where, again, there's somebody watching. They don't really have any idea. They don't really know. They just see the ball go in or that doesn't go in. And that's all they know. And so it takes somebody, and you've played the game at a high level, was a great player, understand all of it. And so in my view, that's why I think, and obviously you're well-spoken and so, brilliant, kind of a young guy, the sky's the ceiling for you. So I believe in you as a player, but now in your career, I think you're just getting ready. You're just at the beginning of hopefully something that's going to be a lot of fun for you.
I hope so. You're exactly right. It is funny. When teams lose games, you hear people in the community, what do they always say? Man, we just couldn't hit shots last game. Why couldn't you hit those shots? It's a reason. They couldn't make anything. It's a reason why you can't make those shots. And as you mentioned with football, every play, there's a replay analysis between the next one. The analyst gets to break it down. He gets a full replay. He gets to talk about it. He gets to say what they're going to do on the next one. In basketball, you have from the three-point line to the three-point line in transition to get it out. You have from when they inbound the basketball, if they make a shot, to say something for you, got to toss it back over to your play-by-play guy. That's right. And you got to be able to get it out so people can get it. It's not football when you got 30 seconds of segments to really break down a play with a telestrator and a replay to show you exactly what the route was from two different angles. So it's fun, but I enjoy doing it.
Richard, talk about this, because the game has changed. Obviously, college sports in general, you now have, name, image, and likeness, where if we go back to when you were in high school,
I would have
made a lot of money, Richard. you'd have had a jump start on a adult life with a lot of money in the bank back then. But so the game has changed from name, image, and likeness, where players can be compensated for. Well, it was supposed to be just name, image, and likeness, but now it's basically recruiting. It's the Wild West.
Right.
And we've lost a lot. We've gained a lot because players are able to get paid, but then we've lost a lot too. I look back at like yourself and Antoine Petway and Irwin Dudley and Chuck Davis, these guys that, I had coached at Alabama, and you chose Alabama in my view, for all the right reasons. What it was going to do for your career, what it's going to do for the rest of your life. It's not just a 4-year decision. It's a life decision, where now it's so transactional. If one school offers you $400,000 and the next one offers you $700,000, I'm probably going there, regardless of academic programs or anything like that. So give me your take a little bit on, start with Richard, what you think, if any, you may not agree, but I think you would, but you start off with maybe what you think has been lost a little bit with the new model of the NIL plus being able to transfer without having to sit out, kind of what maybe we've lost in that.
Well, I think the problem is that within the NIL and the transfer portal is that they came at the same time. Yeah. And that creates an incentive for someone to transfer for NIL purposes. I never really saw the NIL thing as a positive, because I don't see this true market value of the college athlete. I see a market value for recruits, but this notion that you're going to have the college athlete to be marketing a product of a business, I never saw that. If I'm any school, if I'm in Los Angeles, why would I want to get a kid at UCLA to market my product as opposed to get someone for the Lakers? Like, what sense does that make for the business if I'm trying to make money? So I didn't think that they had that. I also think that their perceived market value is really tied to a university, and it's tied to a brand. And I found that out personally, and most players will find that out when they turn professional, because what happens is when you're playing for one of these top schools, Alabama, that has a huge following, or any other school that has a huge following, people know you because of your affiliation. The moment you take the jersey off, they don't know who you are. And it's a false sense of reality for a lot of these players because they feel like that they are the one that's driving the market, but it's really the next man up. Now, I also think, I'm not saying that kids shouldn't have any compensation. If it was a true NIL, and let's say a kid like myself in school who dad ran high school basketball camps, if I wanted to run a basketball camp and charge for it and I had the ability to do it, then yeah, I think you should be able to get compensated. But if you're not really doing something that is, going to be rewarded in the true marketplace, then what did you really do to earn that money? I look at several things in this, mainly from the basketball side. The market is not really what they're going to see in the professional ranks. And I'm concerned with how that's going to impact the player long term because you're getting recruited. There's some number that you get because it's just a bidding war with other teams because you have to have good players to win. It's just that simple. Every coach will tell you, I might have all the best X and O's in the world, but you have to have the Jims and the Joes. It doesn't matter. You have to have those guys. So they're recruiting you so someone else doesn't have them. But what they'll find out is that you're not going to have that same market value when you turn professional. There's only 30 teams in the NBA, and there's 15 jobs, 450 jobs. There's thousands of kids playing college basketball. And the odds of you being one of those draft picks and sticking for a long period of time when you got to look at every single year, 60 picks, 30 of them or so are going to be guaranteed contracts. 15 are going to be international players. The majority are going to be young players who are just out of high school that they're taking. So the odds are not on your side. And it creates a false sense of reality of what you're going to be dealing with. I would also say this. I know the NCAA and the old model takes a lot of criticism, but if you're really there for the college, I think that needs to be in the forefront. This is college athletics and it's a school.
Said it right.
That's the first thing. People seem to forget this. And the value financially of an education is significant. The financial value of all of the amenities that are provided to you as a student athlete are significant. And there's a narrative out there that everybody's out there playing for a bag of chips. And it's like, this is not the case. The 99% of the players that are playing high level sports, if you're on these big Power 4 or Power 5 teams, you will never fly another charter flight in your life after you finished at that school. Like, you will never blow out a pair of Nike shoes and someone brings you a pair out of the back like it's nothing. You will never walk around, staying in high luxury hotels and eating $40 steaks on the road and, with $1,000 worth of shoe apparel gear all on your body at all period of time with a coaching staff that has 25 plus people involved. If you play professional, even if you're in the NBA, if you go overseas, the numbers are going to be much smaller. You're not going to have the staffing. You're not going to have the facilities that these players have. So I think all of this stuff that's going into it creates a false sense of reality of what the professional ranks are. And I think there's some consequences to that psychologically, because when you're given so much early on, I'm here to tell you, and everybody can tell you who's a former professional athlete, it's a tough transition for many. And it's a harder fall the higher you climbed in the profession when you fall back down. And I have concerns about how players have to deal with that moving forward. And if they don't handle their money well and they blow it all, then it's a hard situation to deal with, having something and losing it and knowing that you never have the opportunity to regain it.
Right, right. And you look at NIL, and you said that your answer, that was so good, Richard. It's so profound, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head and with every part of that. And the tricky part for me is, now that I'm older and I'm not coaching right now, but I also look back and I see with the portal, and I went back, a couple of the teams got recognized, and I got to see you, and they had a couple of our teams that they brought out to half court, and we went down to a little local place there afterwards, and I'm with Chuck and Demetrius Smith and Irwin and some of the guys, and like Chuck Davis, he didn't play as a freshman very much at all. And he's like, Coach, I'd have transferred. Like, I was out of there. I mean, if I didn't have to sit out, I would have left. And I think part of it for me too, Richard, with the transfer portal is that we're supposed to be in the business in college athletics of teaching young people. This is a transition from high school to adulthood, and we're right in that transitional period. And I think what we've lost, and this kind of makes me sad, really, for the young people, we've lost that ability for somebody to say, okay, I'm not playing, it's not going my way right now, but my answer is not just to cut and run. My answer is to get better. I just have to get better. I have to stay with it. And you're going to be in a job one day, and it's not going to go in your favor. And you just got to get better, and you can't always hunt for another opportunity. Do you agree with that a little bit with the portal? What's your take on that?
Totally. And listen, I mean, even for me, if the portal was there, I would have considered it. Every player is going to consider it. I mean, Coach, you played college basketball and transferred. I mean, like the realities of it for all of us. We're competitors. You want to play right now, but you don't know until much later that there's a lot in this game that you have to learn to really be good. You also don't understand until you get older and really much older, maybe until you finally do some coaching yourself, that the coaches have a lot on their plate. I was fortunate to see that as a kid growing up, but they're not just managing one player on the team. They're managing everybody on the team. They are professionals. It's a tough job. There are consequences for them, even if it's not their performance that led to whatever it was. And on the flip side, for players in college in that development period, most college players make a lot of mistakes, and they cannot see it just from a basketball standpoint. And the old way, it shielded you from that criticism because you were allowed to fail. And I hate to see a lot of things now is that you see now with social media and people on the message boards and whatnot, they're openly critical of the kids because they get paid. And it's a mentality also within the coaches that it's like, well, I don't know how long you're going to be here. I'm paying you to be here. I'm expecting certain expectations. And you had a little bit more grace in the old system. And that was good for kids. And nowadays, I don't think that they understand. Some of them might not handle the accountability of having to deliver. And that's what makes you professional. It's like I like to say, man, like, professional is not a noun. It's an adjective. It's how you go about your business. It's what you do. And that's what makes you a professional, not just because you're receiving a paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Richard, you go to switch gears a little bit, and your answers were so wonderful. But you go back, and let's look right now at Alabama's basketball program right now, because I think that Nate Oates is just doing – I admire what he's doing right now. And I think what they've done such a good job of, as the rules have changed and the portal where you can take transfers, which, obviously when, I was there and for years and years, that wasn't part of the equation. The coaches today who can strategically and correctly use the portal, because it's part of what we live in now. You have to, I don't care where you are, it's a part of the turf. But in my view, I think Nate and his staff at Alabama have done a really good job. Obviously look at Grant Nelson and Mark Sears and, some of the guys they've had as far as the transfers. They've been able to find, I call them kind of free agents. It's really a free agent world we live in. They can go grab a free agent that fits their system and style, who's older, who rarely, they are this year a little bit with the young freshmen they're playing, but not very often. You have an older team, but I think they have just done a superb job of utilizing the current rules. Whether we like them or not, they are what they are, and I think they've done a great, great job with that. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. And the key to it is that you have to play in a style that allows players to be easily plugged in. So, if you're a system coach that you have a lot of intricate things to run and you have to learn and you have, you're right.
Hey, yeah. That was us.
Yeah. Coach. I mean, like, it takes time to learn, a continuous motion offense that has a lot of reads, that takes a lot of drilling. But if you're playing a tempo that younger players like to play faster. And if you can put them in a position to use their natural ability and just get up and down and give them some quick decisions and reads, then you can plug and play. And that's what the really good coaches in the game have adjusted to. Now, I think within that, they've adjusted to it, but having a philosophy that you believe in organically is really the key. It's one thing I've seen some coaches who have tried to transfer over to this style, and it's not them. It's not who they are, and they don't have as much success as the guys who truly believe in playing this way. And that's where the difference is. If you believe in playing that style that you can easily add players in, then you'll be successful. If you don't, then you have to really find a special group of players that you can teach your system to. And within that, I think the old school coaches that did that, it wasn't just about the basketball. I think there were some values in running some system, like to teach some teamwork, some togetherness, being connected, how to grind things out. It was a bigger understanding philosophically than just trying to win a basketball game.
And I think that's a great answer. And I also think when I look at Alabama right now, you make such a good point, Richard. It's so true. You articulated it so well. The way that they play, and, Nate has really done a good job of kind of defining, how they want to get those threes and how quickly in the shot clock. But then they're finding players around the country that fit that style. And to me, in today's college basketball game, in today's game with the rules that they are, and obviously NIL and how much money you can give a player. And I always tell people NIL stands for now it's legal, by the way, because for years and years everybody was doing something. But, now it's part of recruiting. But in my view,
might have been better in the old way, too, to be honest. The market was properly adjusted. Yeah, the market was properly adjusted.
But I like how they're playing, and I think he's one of the perfect guys for the new era of basketball because of how they play, the way they shoot the three. The portal fits them because they can go find guys quickly that fit with what they want to do, and it's attractive. It's an attractive way to play. And so when I look at it, I see a lot of coaches haven't adjusted yet.
Right.
Where Nate, it's kind of the way he wants to play. It's kind of built for this. It's built for this era. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And oftentimes they get you because he forces you to play his game and you don't realize it. And when you play his game, you're playing right into his hands. But I mean, it's the analytics behind it. To him and his brain, when I observe it, it really makes sense. I think a lot of coaches have been hesitant to embrace analytics, and then they use them for certain reasons. But I think when he really views the game through that lens and understands how to take advantage of each situation, everyone else is using the analytics, but they don't really know how it applies in their system and what they're trying to do and where they're trying to get shots and when they want to get shots and who they want to have them a certain way. And he understands that. He understands the pieces that he needs to get. And the way that these players play now, I mean, because kids don't play pickup ball anymore. They're all working with trainers. There are no back to the basket players anymore. No one knows how to play in a slow down pace when you walk down the court and pass it and cut and play off the pass and the ball never touched the ground. That's over with. That is over with. And you got to really get players who want to play the game the way that they know how to play. And his system allows them to do that.
Yeah, it does. It does. Richard, kind of wrap it up here. I look back and, when you're a coach, you're excited to coach guys or recruit players like yourself and coach them. But then after that, as they, leave college and they become adults and they have families and children and careers, it just makes you, for me specifically, like really proud. Like when I watch you, and I've gotten to see you when I've gone back to Tuscaloosa, but man, I'm really, really proud of you because some guys, they struggle when basketball is over to find their footing. They struggle and they sometimes can't the spotlight is off of them, and they're not the star of the room anymore when they walk in. And, career-wise, they just can't figure out that next step of life. But you have just done such a really, really good job. And it talks to me, it says a lot about who you are as a person, your character. You were a great, great player, but character-wise, you were just as great. And I think that is one of the reasons why you're doing so well. So I'm really proud of you, Richard. I'm really excited for you. I tell people all the time, I think you're a star in the making in this field. You just, you're getting going here and you're climbing the ladder, but I think it's all there in front of you.
Yeah, well, Coach, I definitely appreciate, the words, because I appreciate you, and I appreciate, the challenge that you put me through at the university, helping me to grow as a person and a player. People don't realize, my last year there, you encouraged me and challenged me to be better physically. And that played a huge role in how I viewed not only the game, but myself. To have that type of drive and determination to get up and do, the tough things first, to be better at the game that you love, to be better for your team. It really helped me. And I really appreciate those lessons. I also love to see the space I see you in now too, Coach. I mean, coaching I see is a tough gig. And a lot of times it's a thing where a lot of critical people in it. But, to see where you're in the space now, be doing podcasts and reaching out with everyone, it's great to see. And great to see that you're doing well and happy and enjoying your life. And because that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Well, Richard, I'm a big fan, and as we move on, I hope for the best for you. I think it's going to be wonderful. So thank you so much, man. Thank you for carving out some time for the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and, again, best wishes to you.
Thank you so much, Coach. Appreciate it.